Modern screen adaptations of novels often gain and lose elements of the original text, depending on the context of the release and use of film techniques. Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, published in 1985, reflects a period of religious conservatism, encompassing values of extremism and authority over women in a totalitarian society. In contrast, the 2017 film adaptation by Bruce Miller shifts focus on the suppression of individual rights through elements of diversity and increased perspectives, allowing for a strong modern relevance. Personally, I was drawn towards this topic as I have always found interest in how feminism is represented in media, and enjoyed comparison of historical context and film techniques to establish what has been gained and lost through the screen adaptation of this text. The idea of how context shapes a text is heavily seen within both adaptations of The Handmaid's Tale. The original novel, published in 1985, was written in a time of increasing religious conservatism within America. However, this wasn't just a vague cultural shift, it was heavily affecting people's lives through law and politics. Abortion rights were at risk of being removed, their federal funding restricted, and Ronald Reagan's presidency allowed space for conservatives to be heard in mainstream media. Further, the Equal Rights Amendment, led by Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedman, which focused around the guarantee of rights for all Americans regardless of gender, was being targeted by conservative Phyllis Schlafly, who insisted women belonged solely in the home. The novel's reflection of these issues through Gilead's restrictions, such as women being forbidden to speak freely, stripping them of their autonomy, reflects 1980s America's restriction of women's rights, allowing Gilead a less dystopian feel. But is anything added or lost through the modern context? Fast forward to 2017, Bruce Miller's 2017 TV adaptation was released in a time of shifting political and social climates. Donald Trump's election into his first term of presidency allowed for the rise of conservative and religious opinions within politics. Later, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which protected women's rights to abortion, allowed American states to enact their own laws on abortion, some banning it outright. Suddenly, watching women being forced to give birth in Gilead to save birth rates became more than just science fiction, with women across America being forced to carry their babies to term. At the same time, the hashtag #MeToo movement was gaining momentum, allowing women globally to be heard on issues of sexual harassment and abuse. This movement gives survivors a voice and allows for awareness of harassment and abuse to be raised through a safe platform. This works to contrast the removal of women's voice in Gilead, adding a layer of relevance through the modern adaptation. I found incorporation of reflections of modern events allows the adaptation to gain increased relevance, strengthening the understanding with modern viewers and gaining favour with critics. The idea of what is gained and lost through screen adaptations brings into question the idea of what is gained and lost through the adaptation's accessibility and the inclusions of modern diversity. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood places Gilead as a white supremacist project, in which any person of colour or children of Ham are deported to the national homelands, an allusion to the South African apartheid, a system of segregation in South Africa in which people were classed in groups based around their respective race. Atwood's reference to the resettlement of the children of Ham and 3,000 have arrived this week in National Homeland 1 increasingly reminds that oppression in Gilead is both based upon gender and race, something largely lost in the novel's singular perspective, but addressed in the adaptation. This highlights how modern adaptations reinterpret social commentary for modern audiences. However, despite this, the novel itself almost completely erases people of colour from its narrative. The novel's singular voice from Offred's perspective lends the novel a narrowed focus and limited range of diversity. Whilst this singular perspective works to reinforce the novel's feminist critique of patriarchy, it diminishes the experiences of people of colour within Gilead through lack of reference. Contrarily, the screen adaptation makes a different choice in order to gain a sense of diversity through the incorporation of a racially diverse cast, including Samira Wiley as Moira. This has been done to reflect contemporary expectations of diversity within media and to avoid the alienation of an all-white cast. Atwood herself saying that the erasure of people of colour within the cast would look like it was endorsing racism, something which the show aimed to avoid in fear of distraction from the values of religious extremism as a form of political control and feminine rebellion. The diversification of the show's adaptation and the incorporation of a wider narrative perspective from multiple characters allows the offering a deeper feminist critique rather than in the original novel. For example, Moira's escape from Gilead in the show and her activism in Canada adds a new layer of resilience to the show, something which I personally found really powerful. However, whilst diversity is added, the idea of Gilead as a white supremacist project, which paralleled real-life segregation and ideologies seen through the South African apartheid and American civil rights movement. Whilst the show gains accessibility through allowing modern viewers to see themselves through the cultural diversity of the show, it loses Atwood's dark humour and irony in reference to the original white supremacist values of the novel itself. As the novel has been adapted into a TV show, sound design and cinematography have been incorporated to allow for both the loss and gain of emotional impact in different aspects of the film and show. The screen adaptation allows for the gain of deeper emotional connections with a broader range of characters, through the incorporation of multiple perspectives, rather than just a single one as in the original text. Further, the shift from Offred's internal experiences to external conflicts allows for increased emphasis on the horrific realities of Gilead on a broader scale of experiences, rather than just a single one. In favour of adding increased perspectives, the TV show incorporates the use of voiceover to offer a split perspective of how Offred is physically portrayed and her internal ideas. However, this differs to Atwood's text, which primarily focuses on Offred's internal dialogue, leaving little reference to her physical self. This leaves the show to gain emotional intensity by allowing audiences to hear her internal monologue and the emphasis on how control has been exacted upon her. The removal of a singular point of view and increased emphasis on Offred's internal monologue rather than her direct perspective can diminish Atwood's psychological depth in favour of more detailed and action-packed scenes, with focus on Offred as a rebellious figure through her internal monologue and increased characterisation of other characters, leading to a less developed sense of fear and oppression within Gilead. In relation to cinematography, in dramatic moments and character reactions to events, such as the handmaid's refusal to stone Janine, close-up shots add emotional intensity, allowing increased focus on emotional connections with the audience through visual reactions and ideas the novel cannot sustain. Further, film techniques are used through long shots, used to emphasize themes of imprisonment and surveillance, enforcing a sense of oppression through the loss of privacy and individuality, which is not so easily shown in the novel. The inclusion of cinematography through film techniques and sound design within the TV adaptation allows for both loss and gain of emotional intensity through multiple perspectives and visual reactions not portrayed in the novel. When I looked at both Margaret Atwood's 1985 novel The Handmaid's Tale and Bruce Miller's 2017 screen adaptation, I discovered that screen adaptations often gain and lose elements of the original text, but neither ends up better than the other. Atwood's novel gains power through its singular perspective and cultural parallels to 1980s America, losing inclusivity through the erasure of people of colour. Miller's series, on the other hand, gains relevance to a modern audience through use of multiple perspectives and added diversity, as well as use of screen techniques. The adaptation, however, lost the psychological depth of the original novel and unsettling nature of the text. I found this investigation interesting as I looked into parallels between each adaptation and our modern world, gaining a deeper insight into my previous interests of the different portrayals of feminism in media.